If you were raised in the 1980s, you might carry a specific kind of inner contrast. You can feel nostalgic without idealizing the past. You can enjoy modern convenience while still missing the slower pace you once took for granted. You may be comfortable being alone, but also unusually aware of when you're being watched. And sometimes, you notice how quickly you can shift between being emotionally steady and quietly overstimulated, like your mind learned to live in two different speeds. A lot of people talk about the 1980s as a cultural era, but the psychology of being raised in that time is more personal than that. It's about the environment your brain adapted to. The pace of life was different. The social expectations were different. The way adults related to children was different. And the biggest change is that the rules you learned early were built for a world that no longer exists in the same way. Research shows that childhood environments shape what the nervous system considers normal. If you grew up with more unstructured time, more independence, and fewer constant check-ins, your baseline may lean towards self-management. You learn to entertain yourself, to wait, to figure things out without instant answers. Studies suggest that when children practice autonomy early, they often develop strong internal regulation skills. But they can also develop a habit of downplaying needs because needing too much attention wasn't always encouraged. That's one reason many people raised in the 1980s have a steady, practical emotional style. You might not panic easily. You may handle stress by becoming organized and functional. You may prefer to solve problems quietly before talking about them. Psychological studies indicate that problem-focused coping can become a default when a child learns that emotions don't change the situation, but actions do. This can create resilience, but it can also create a subtle emotional pattern where you feel safest when you're useful, productive, or in control. The social world also felt less visible. You weren't raised with a constant audience. Most of your moments didn't become content. Mistakes weren't permanently recorded. Awkward phases had space to disappear. Recent research suggests that when people grow up with fewer external evaluation cues, they often develop a stronger sense of private self, meaning they experience identity as something internal rather than something performed. That can be grounding, but it can also make modern visibility feel strangely invasive. For someone raised in the 1980s, the expectation to share, update, and be reachable can register less like connection and more like demand. Another imprint is the relationship with boredom. In that era, boredom wasn't immediately solved. You sat with it. You wandered. You daydreamed. You found ways to fill time without being fed constant stimulation. Researchers have found that boredom can push the mind toward imagination and self-directed exploration when there isn't an instant escape. So many people raised in the 1980s developed a comfort with mental space. And that's why constant notifications, constant feeds, and constant input can feel draining now. Your nervous system remembers quiet as a real state, not just a short break between interruptions. This upbringing also shaped how many people relate to authority and responsibility. Adults often felt more distant, and expectations were sometimes implied rather than negotiated. You were expected to adapt. You were expected to be resilient. Studies suggest that when children grow up in environments where expectations are strict or unspoken, they can develop high sensitivity to what others need from them. You may be good at reading the room. You may anticipate problems before they happen. And you may carry a quiet pressure to not be the one who creates extra work for anyone else. In relationships, this can show up as loyalty and reliability paired with privacy. You might care deeply, but not always express it with constant words. You may show love through showing up, helping, fixing, and staying consistent. Psychological studies indicate that people differ in how they signal closeness. For many people raised in the 1980s, closeness can feel safest when it's steady and low drama, not constantly examined. That doesn't mean you avoid emotion. It means you prefer emotion that feels real, grounded, and not performative. At the same time, being raised in the 1980s often created a certain inner toughness that can become a double-edged pattern. You might be skilled at pushing through discomfort, but less skilled at noticing when you've been pushing for too long. You may minimize your own exhaustion because you learned early that you can handle things. Research shows that people who internalize self-reliance can be slower to seek support, not because they don't value it, but because their nervous system expects to manage alone first. Over time, that can turn into quiet burnout that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There's also a generational tension around identity and adulthood. Many people raised in the 1980s grew up with clearer milestones and a more linear story about how life should progress. But adulthood later became more complex, more expensive, and less predictable. Studies suggest that when the external world becomes unstable, people can feel disoriented, even if they're doing everything right, because the old rules no longer guarantee the same outcomes. That can create a low-level grief that doesn't always get named. Not a longing to go back, but a feeling that the ground moved under your feet and you had to adapt without getting a manual. And yet, one of the quiet strengths of people raised in the 1980s is adaptability that doesn't need a spotlight. You learned how to be alone without falling apart. You learned how to entertain yourself. You learned how to tolerate uncertainty. You learned how to stay steady when things are inconvenient. Researchers have found that early experiences of autonomy and self-directed time can build persistence and problem-solving, which often shows up later as calm competence. So the psychology of being raised in the 1980s isn't just nostalgia. It's the way your nervous system learned safety through privacy, space, and self-reliance, and then had to live in a world that increasingly rewards visibility, speed, and constant connection. If you sometimes feel like you belong to a quieter rhythm, it's not because you're stuck in the past. It's because your baseline was shaped in a different kind of world, and your mind still recognizes what it once used to feel like to breathe. If this felt familiar, you can like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who was raised in the same in-between era.